Chapter 1. Saint Quentin. Circa 255 AD, in the inauspicious fifth month of the year, in the particularly inauspicious middle of the month, when the Lemures, the malignant ghosts and shades of Rome's history, rose out of nothingness and night to torment their living descendants, a boy child was born in Rome. His father, Zeno, an imperial senator, named the fruit of his loins Quentin Quintinus. Zeno made grand sacrifices to the Roman pantheon of gods and goddesses to secure his son's future. A slaughtered pregnant sow to honor Maia, a bull cut down for Jupiter, 2 sheep bled out and burned for Juno, and in the Scythian tradition, he had one of his slaves gutted, then beheaded, as an offering to Ares, god of war. Perhaps the sacrifices netted Senator Zeno gains. Perhaps not. Who can say? Unfortunately, they had little to no impact on his youngster, Quentin Quintinus, and did less than nothing to inform the lad's personal choice of deities in the years to come. In his teens, Quentin stumbled upon the newfangled cult of Christianity. Like most teens, he was eager to seize upon ideas that his parents held in absolute contempt. Quentin fell in with a gang of rebellious Christian youths, led by a man named Lucian, and together the young cultists fled Rome for Gaul, planning to spread the word and convert the pagans, Roman and barbarian alike, to what they had embraced as the one true faith. They ran into some issues along the way. In particular, the fact that no one was eager to give up their own gods and goddesses for a handful of new ones. Pagans of all stripes tried to explain to the Christian boys that they already had a Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. For some, it was Jupiter, Ares, and Juno. For others, Zeus, Mars, and Hera. For the Celts, it was the Dagda, Danu, and Morrigan, and so on. Regardless, few were excited about the prospect of competition, especially the high priests of the established pantheons, whose grace, standing, and cash flow required their gods to be the top dogs. Calm, cold tolerance was the initial response. But as the young Roman missionaries preached, proselytized, purported miracles, and preached some more, the locals and the local Roman constabulary became increasingly annoyed. The irritating grain of sand became a pebble, which became a stone, which rubbed away until the irritation metastasized into a festering wound. And finally, sanctioned by Rome, a fierce prefect of the Roman legion, the empire appointed governor of Belgic Gaul, a fellow named Rictius, began his own crusade to solve the Christian problem. Governor Rictius had his men begin by making an example of a pair of twin brothers, Crispin and Crispinian. The matching set of heretical Christians, sons of Roman privilege who, just like Lucian and Quentin Quintinus, had fled to Gaul and were preaching the Gospels, making occasional converts of the local pagans by day, and cobbling together sandals at night to make ends meet. Rictius put a stop to all of it. He had the boys dragged out of their cobbler's shop and publicly tortured. Then the centurions hung millstones around the boys' necks and dropped them into the Somme River. When the drowning did not immediately achieve the desired effect, Rictius had his soldiers haul the boys out of the water. There, on the river bank, he had their heads hacked from their shoulders. They left the bodies where they fell gradually decomposing into rich, fertile soil that washed away into the Somme. Rictius's next victims were part of his own governmental apparatus. When word filtered to him that a pair of Roman tax collectors named Rufinus and Varius had been using their official work to spread the word of Christianity to Rome's debtors while assessing and collecting taxes from the local barbarians, Rictius flushed with rage. What more criminal way to hold a captive audience than with a heavily armed garrison of Roman soldiers at your back, while you were seizing proper tribute from that same audience? The scheme backfired on Rufinus and Varius on all counts. Rufinus and Varius were arrested for heresy and abuse of office. Predictably, Rictius subjected the pair to torture, beheading them, crucifying them, and leaving their bodies on the Roman road near Soissons to rot. Governor Rictius's men captured his fifth martyr, our very own Quentin Quintinus of Rome, in Amiens, a city Durant and his company would awake to smell burning as the Red Maiden razed it to the ground 1,600 some years later. These Christians were getting increasingly annoying. Governor Rictius decided he would deliver Quentin to the capital of Belgic Gaul, Reims, for a public trial. Once they found him guilty, Governor Rictius could torture and execute the boy in the public square, which would be a spectacle, much grander, more effective messaging than simply killing him in the hinterlands. Rictius had Quentin manacled and carried by a wagon toward Reims. But on the journey there, the boy would not shut his yap. To Rictius's great annoyance, devout Quentin Quintinus revealed that he had memorized the majority of the New Testament Psalms. The boy spent all his waking moments reciting them at the top of his lungs. Rictius had Quentin hauled out of the wagon bed. The centurions tied him to the rear end, forcing him to keep pace with the plodding horse team. Rictius expected exhaustion would eventually shut the boy up, but it only seemed to exacerbate the situation. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble," Quentin shouted from the back of the train. "Therefore we will not fear," Quentin continued. "Though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake." About a third of the way to Reims, Rictius had enough. On the banks of the Somme River, Quentin was almost through shouting the 46th Psalm when Rictius set down his decanter of wine and halted the column. He stepped down from his carriage and had his personal bodyguards accompany him to the back of the wagon, where delirious Quentin continued his liturgy. "There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah!" cried Quentin. Rictius sighed deeply. He had his men detach the rope that bound Quentin to the wagon. Quentin pressed on. "Come, behold the works of the Lord! What desolations he hath made in the earth! He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire." Rictius had his men gag Quentin and toss him back into the wagon. They hauled him directly to Ain, and in the Roman fort, Rictius had a long, blessedly silent dinner by himself. After dessert, he headed into the bowels of the fortress, where Quentin was being primed on the rack. He was stripped naked, stretched on his back, feet freshly manacled to a large gear at the bottom of the table. Rictius set his hand on his hip and stared at the young Roman over his wine cup. He took a gentle swallow before he spoke. "Are you unwell?" Rictius asked. Quentin looked over at him, uncertain how to answer the question. How do you mean?" The legionnaires took Quentin's hands and pulled them over his head, sliding them into manacles that matched the ones holding his ankles. "I mean, in the head. Are you unwell? Were you dropped as a child? Did your mother ever send for Apollo's priests when you were a boy to sort out an affliction?" Rictius asked. No, not that I recall," Quentin replied. Rictius nodded and finished his wine. "If I may ask, how is it that an educated Roman boy, a child of nobility, son of a distinguished father, has given himself over to the silliest cult I've yet heard of, one where you adore a man crucified and tortured at the hands of other men, whose all-powerful, all-knowing Father in the heavens refuses to come to his aid, whose fellow travelers refuse the same?" Quentin replied, "My God is the creator of heaven and earth." "Is he?" Rictius cut him off. "Your God is the creator of heaven and earth?" Quentin nodded, earnest. "I see. Then why, if I may be so bold, are we just now hearing about him?" Rictius asked. Quentin bit his lip as his hands were pulled taut. Moses brought his divine commandments, and we honor him by—" "Moses, the Jewish fellow," Rictius said with a grin. I have performed miracles. I have healed the sick. I have healed the lame," Quentin shouted. Rictius gave a nod to the legionnaire at the head of the rack. He nudged the wheel's gear stop free and turned the crank 5 degrees, stretching Quentin beyond what was humanly possible. Quentin let out a yelp of pain. "I have a proposal for you, Quentin," Rictius said, "out of respect for your father and his station." He looked around the chamber. "If your God can send another Moses to set you free, if he can strike me down here, right where I stand before you, my men are my witnesses. The moment the lightning strikes, the moment your God breaketh, cutteth, or burneth me, they will cut you free and send you on your merry Christian way." Quentin was silent. Rictius gave a bored, twirling motion with his hand, and the men at Quentin's hands and feet turned their gears. There was an audible pop in Quentin's shoulders, and he let out another shriek of pain. He stared at Rictius as tears fell down his cheeks. In silence, he began to pray, and not for forgiveness for his torturer. Quentin begged his God for Rictius's immediate murder. Ardently, passionately, fervently, devotedly, he prayed for righteous violence to rain down. A long moment passed as the two men stared at each other, and nothing happened. Rictius shrugged. He signaled his men to press on in their duty. Quentin was racked within an inch of his life. Ligaments, joints, muscles, and tender tissue pulled past their breaking points. The expert torturers took long wires and shoved the needle-sharp ends into the hollows above his clavicles, driving the thin metal tendrils down through him, organs and all, until the sharp, bloody ends lanced up out of his thighs. Iron nails were procured and hammered into his hands, between his ribs, then into his skull. Quentin cried out to his God. When he opened his eyes, through the throb of pain and the curtain of blood dripping from the nail holes in his head, he saw the man coming with the axe. "Oh, Lord, my Lord!" Quentin shrieked. It took 3 strokes to cut the boy's noggin from his shoulders and stop the yammering. Rictius hefted the decapitation by its curly Roman locks and walked up and out of the fortress to the center of a Roman-built bridge that spanned the Somme. He leaned back and hurled the thing as far as he could. Quentin's head hurtled through space, arcing up and away, reaching apex and gently reversing course, tumbling down, splashing into the river, floating away on the current. Eventually, Quentin's frozen, slack-jawed head got caught up in the reeds and came to rest in a marsh. There, submerged on the banks of the Somme River, it was picked clean by the local fish. That was that for Quentin Quintinus. But the story of Quentin Quintinus, unlike Quentin himself, would not die. While his headless corpse rotted away to nothing, his tale of woe grew and grew into something Quentin would have laughed at if you told him about it over dinner. His legend declared that several decades after his death, the remnants of his scalp, a handful of teeth, and the nails used to spike his body were found by a blind woman on the bank of the River Somme, who, upon the discovery, found herself miraculously healed and able to see again. Despite the extremely suspect nature of the crazy woman's claims, Quentin Quintinus's case was sent to the diocesan tribunal in Rome. The grand men, in their grand frocks and towering hats, revisited the purported details around Quentin's miracles. They determined them to be all 100% sound and factual. Quentin Quintinus was beatified and reborn as Saint Quentin. Dead Quentin had metamorphosed into a martyr and over centuries a saint. In further time, his watery grave became the focal point for an entire city in Ain, France. It would come to be known as San Quentin, with a towering basilica built in the mid-600s AD to house the bits of hair, broken molars, and rusting Roman nails that everyone seemed remarkably sure were his holy remains. Quentin was ordained the patron saint of surgeons, chaplains, locksmiths, and tailors. It was determined that prayers invoking his name by the faithful were also solid protection from coughing, sneezing, and the swelling of limbs. Then, in the 16th century, it was determined that St. Quentin ought to be even further elevated. There was a new class of men that needed protection, and St. Quentin was the man for the job. He was named the patron saint of bombardiers, the men manning cutting-edge, newfangled artillery, loading the cannons and setting flame to the breach, blasting metal balls into wooden man-of-war frigates and battering stout castle curtain walls with their big guns, needed a saint of their own to guide and guard them, and some wag in the Roman papacy decided that St. Quentin was undoubtedly the man for the job. And so it seems entirely appropriate that in the year of our Lord 1914, the city of San Quentin had instantly, almost miraculously, transmuted into a city of bombardiers. As the Great European War kicked off, German bombardiers silenced the guns of French bombardiers with a lightning storm of artillery that flattened the city and was followed by a bloody rush of infantrymen who stormed the town. Then, on sturdy steel rail lines, built atop ancient Roman roads, the German invaders used San Quentin as a hub to rush everything forward that an army might need to do the dirty, dirty work of the bombardier. The San Quentin munitions dump was the beginning and end of the line for all that material. For some 3.5 years, trains from Frankfurt chugged along the rails between the sister cities, flooding France with German men, machines, and the necessary toys to sustain both man and machine in wartime. Prisoners of war and labor battalions broke their backs, dragging the artillery pieces, ammunition, rifles, pistols, bullets, grenades, and racks and stacks of food rations, uniforms, and sundries off the trains. Then they filled the empty train cars back up for a return trip to Germany with bags of letters home, broken, wounded men, soldiers on leave, dejected prisoners, and dead officers. By 1917, the San Quentin depot was a smorgasbord of top-of-the-line weaponry, kit, and dead men awaiting their final destinations. The munitions depot, ringed with barbed wire to deter potential theft, sprawled across a lot the size of 6 football fields. The main entrance lay to the south, where a small gauge rail line, suitable for handcars, ran 5 kilometers from the rail station on the southerly side of the river to the depot itself. As one entered the depot, they found a large, open courtyard, ringed on 3 sides with semi-permanent huts that served as a home to the German Labour Battalion, who oversaw the incoming and outgoing equipment. Beyond the huts were ranks of artillery guns, mobile anti-aircraft batteries, and crates of all the various forms of infantry-borne weapons, awaiting horse teams and lorries that would pull them forward, along with tens of thousands of shells and bullets necessary to inflict severe suffering on their French and British brethren on the other side of no man's land. But come midnight on Good Friday of 1917, the bustling munitions depot fell silent, its big guns now stuck where they were, waiting in vain for transport that would never come. Something greater and more violent than a bombardier's artillery could ever hope to be had ended the war and begun something worse. All the guardrails against humanity's worst instincts were set aside as the dead rose up on Good Friday and ran amok. The organized chaos and structured madness of war were immediately and ferociously replaced with pure chaos and absolute madness. And now, something more was coming, attempting to bring order back to the field of battle. In the shimmer of torchlight, it tramped into the San Quentin ammunition dump in dead German, French, and British bodies. As the rain turned to mist and the black flood that coursed down Napoleon's Canal began to subside, General Verus's beleaguered 13th Legion re-entered the ammo dump and fell into formation. The 90-some living men who had so recently volunteered for service as Roman Auxiliary Force stood in column too. But throughout the group, it was twitching and shuddering, post-traumatic stress manifesting itself physically as the survivors tried to reckon with the bloody little mob murders they had committed to save themselves from the Roman dead men. General Verus rode his horse to the midpoint of the courtyard and waited, watching his men troop in and find their places. He had sent Oberon Junius and his top scouting parties out to scour the town for another bridge across the river so they could pursue the metal, fire-spitting turtle and whomever was inside it. Now all he could do was wait, and the patience that required was far from his forte. Verus required stimulation, preferably of the violent variety if sex was not an option. He felt that need growing in direct proportion to the level of his boredom. He looked past his men at the stacks of crates and the ranks of artillery pieces, washed clean of snow by the rainfall. The wet barrels and wooden crates caught a shine from the waning moon and his army's fluttering torches. I wonder, Verus thought, what is inside all of those boxes? Boredom was as dangerous for those surrounding General Verus as it was for him. He saw the scrawny little Irish priest, Father Michael, huddled amidst the living soldiers. Verus looked to the depot's front gate, but there was no sign of Oberon Junius or any of his scouts. He kicked his horse's flanks and rode across to where Father Michael cowered. "You there," Verus said. "You are my Latin speaker." Father Michael gulped and nodded, wide-eyed. "Ita, vero." "Good. Come forward." "I have questions," Verus replied. Father Michael stepped out of the formation. Verus pointed to the artillery systems and stacked crates. "These boxes, their contents, these weapons, you can explain them." Father Michael knew very little about war and weapons beyond the basics in the Old Testament, but he did know that it was better to be of use than not, so he nodded. Conversely, he knew that it might be imprudent to present himself as an expert and fail, so he glanced back at the other living men. He caught sight of Sergeant Peter Turley, a Royal Irish Fusilier, who had been one of Father Michael's parishioners during the war. "Sergeant Turley, will you please assist me in explaining how some of the German equipment works?" Father Michael asked. Turley stepped forward. "Yes, Father." Turley also recognized that being of use might be a vital component in staying alive, at least until daybreak, when he fully intended to make a run for it. "Sir, this gentleman is an expert and can help explain the artillery and weapons," Father Michael said. Verus gave a terse nod, turned his horse, and headed across the quad toward the massive weapons cache. Father Michael and Sergeant Turley followed at a steady clip. The eyes of the dead Roman troops and their fellow members in the living auxiliary watched them cross. Sergeant Turley felt a creeping dread that this was not going to end well, but he pushed aside a tremble of fear. He glanced at his wristwatch. 3 minutes to midnight. All he had to do was make it to sunrise, then he would bid all this farewell as fast as his feet could carry him. Until that time came, as he had proven in the British Army, he would be an excellent follower.